But if someone gives you the privilege of their time and attention, you want to use that in the most effective way possible. And that's why having the concise story that's authentic and meaningful is so critically important, so that I can use more of my time on the pieces that really separate out who we are as a young organization and where we're going, compared to the, here are the facts and figures as to why we exist. I can show you that in a piece of paper very easily.
I want to ask you a question. Have you ever walked into a doctor's office and been greeted by a Black physician at any level, from your primary care or family doctor to a specialist of any kind? I know that I haven't, and I never really thought much about it until I met Dr. Alex Porter Umphrey, the first Black female neuro-oncologist in the United States. She works at the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona. After working with her on her fundraising story, it got me wondering why, in my 72 years of life, I have never once had a Black doctor treat me at any level. Now, I'm an old white guy, so I never thought much about it because all of my doctors look like me. But what if you're a young Black boy or girl who wants to be a doctor someday? What does that say to them, that none of the doctors that treat them are Black, that look like them? Who are their role models? Who do they get to look up to? In this episode of Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life, you're going to meet Dr. Alex Porter Umphrey, an amazing woman with an inspiring story. Not only is her life story inspiring, she is paying it forward with Elevate Med, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting Black, brown, and culturally diverse medical students with financial scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. She contacted me back in 2019 to take advantage of my offer of a free 20-minute coaching session, which, by the way, is an offer available to you as well. The story she wanted coaching on was for a fundraising presentation to donors. She needed her story to work if she was going to raise the funds needed to support her student scholars. You'll hear that story in this interview. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Alex Porter Umphrey.
My name is Dr. Alex Porter Umphrey. I am a neuro-oncologist at the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona. And my story really begins as a child growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was far less diverse than it is today. And I would look forward to Thursday nights when I would watch The Cosby Show. And that was my first image of a Black doctor. And as a child, not having access to a physician who looked like me, I saw myself in that family and thought of what could be possible in terms of my future. Some years later, Dr. Ben Carson came to national attention for having separated conjoined twins at the brain. But at the time, he had written a biography called The Gifted Hands. And my father brought it home to me to read and learn more about him. And in those pages, I found myself identifying with a young person whose imagination really exceeded his circumstance. And that's really where I started to fall in love with the brain and neuroscience. And in fact, because of his story, I thought that I might want to be a neurosurgeon. I went on to Spelman College, where I got to lift the burden of underrepresentation, now being surrounded by so many smart Black women, and was really liberated for the first time in my life to start to think about who it is that I am and what it is that I want to share with the world. And ultimately, went to medical school at Temple University in Philadelphia. I thought at the time that I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. I planned my rotations such that that would be the first that I did after I finished my first 2 years in the classroom. And after all the excitement and all the buildup, I scrubbed in my first case in neurosurgery and became motion sick under the microscope and realized that I did not have a career in front of me as a neurosurgeon because I couldn't even tolerate the first day. And so for some time, for some months, I struggled with figuring out what is my role in medicine. I thought I had gone all these years thinking that I was going in one direction, only to find out that wasn't it for me. And so I was able to do a program where I was paired with neurologist at Mayo Clinic. And that's really where I fell in love with neurology and the neurologic examination and making some correlations between what was seen on the imaging and what I was experiencing with the patients. And I came back to my medical school and I said, aha, I found it. I want to be a neurologist. And the person said, well, that's all well and good, Alex, but you don't look like a neurologist. And while that person was well intended, he wasn't entirely wrong. Less than 1% of women in this country, Black women, are neurologists. And so I thought, well, if I don't look like a neurologist, I better go to the top training program for neurologists. And that's what led me to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And then I was later recruited back to Mayo Clinic in Arizona to build up the brain cancer program here. And so as doors have opened for me over time, I have felt a profound responsibility to continue to open doors for others. And while I may be the first Black woman practicing neuro-oncology in this country, my desire is to have many so that our workforce represents the patients' populations that we see. And that's really what drove me to found the organization Elevate Med, where our desire is to reach an ideal where the workforce represents the patient population. And so we've done this by investing in young, bright medical students from historically underrepresented backgrounds in medicine. And within our program, we provide scholarship support to reduce their debt burden. We provide them with mentorship and give them the opportunity to have someone who looks like them doing what they do so they can start to imagine the possibilities of what their career may hold. We recognize that physicians are leaders in whatever spaces they hold. And so leadership development is a critical aspect of our program. It's important that our students know their strengths and their stress behaviors. It's important that they know how to carry themselves in a way that commands attention and earns trust. And then finally, financial wellness. Most of us aren't coming from wealthy backgrounds or backgrounds where there's significant experience with money. Most of us are coming from backgrounds where our medical school debt is significant, and we add that on top of undergraduate debt. And we don't come from families who are able to help us much with that expense. And so teaching our students how to navigate those waters in an effective way is critically important so that one day, we hope, our students will become mentors and eventually become donors. And we've developed this cycle of support that will be sustainable through generations. So that's what we're doing with Elevate Med. I'm pleased that we'll be celebrating our 3rd anniversary in May. We'll have given $500,000 in scholarship support by that time. So it's really been incredible to have this impact nationally in such a short amount of time.
So it sounds to me as though early on, there were 2 role models that inspired you, the Cosby Show and seeing Bill Cosby being a doctor. And we'll put aside Bill Cosby and what's going on with him now, but to go back to that moment in time when that was inspiring to so many people. And then Ben Carson comes along and he's this role model as well. But he writes a book and he tells his story. And from what I'm hearing from you, that story gave you permission. It inspired you and gave you permission to think bigger and to reach higher. Am I correct?
You're absolutely right. And there's a famous quote from Marian Wright Edelman: you can't be what you can't see. And so whether it's real or imagined, the Cosby Show example was imagined, an imaginary doctor, right? But for me, Ben Carson was that real example of what was possible. And because of that story, I started to imagine what could be possible in my own life.
So story stimulates imagination, but it also stimulates action. It also allows you to say, well, then I need to start taking steps. I need to start activating this, not just thinking about it or dreaming about it, What can I do? Where can I go? Now, as you are building this organization, Elevate Med, you have to be able to raise funds. You have to connect with people. You have to go to schools. You have to be the one who's talking. So talk a little bit about how your use of storytelling has impacted and influenced and helped you to grow this organization and reach out into the world. And actually, because you didn't start out in life to be a fundraiser. You did not start out in life to be a CEO of a nonprofit. You wanted to be a doctor. And yet here you are, a physician and a Black entrepreneur, CEO of an organization. How does storytelling play into that?
Yeah. First, I had to believe that I actually could do it and that I had all of the skills within me in order to make this dream come true. Because I think many of us stumble or stop in the imagination process thinking, oh, I need to go and get another degree. Oh, I can't do it because I don't have this, that, or the other. So that was the first thing. I had to really believe that I could. The second piece is I started to invest in myself, meaning I knew which areas I needed some help with, and I went and sought out the best to help me make that come true, right? To help me, empower me, to have a team around me, especially in those areas where I needed help. So those are the first two things. When it comes to the story of the why for our organization, it's a very easy story to share with other physicians because so many of us have lived this. For people that are not in the medical field or aren't physicians, that's really where I have to take them back to my experience on my first day of medical school. Before I had any classes, we got separated into those who had money and those who didn't. And for those of us that didn't, we were taken to a big room with 3 tables within that room. And in that room, I made a decision that was going to change the trajectory of my life, and I was not prepared to make that decision at the time. In that room, you had 3 choices for those of us that did not have financial support. We could join the military. What that meant is that the military would pay for your medical school, and then you would owe them in service for the number of years that they paid for. The second option is that I could commit to a career in primary care. Primary care is internal medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN, and family medicine. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And so before even taking one class in medical school, you have to make a decision there. Do I want to sign up for this path without fully knowing all of the options just to eliminate that debt burden? Or do we go to the third table, which is what I decided to do, and commit myself to a combination of both private and federal loans? And that was a decision that left me $300,000 in debt. My husband, also a physician, also from an emotionally supportive family, but one that was not able to be financially supportive, made the same decision. And so ultimately, when we came together in marriage, we recognized that we owed $500,000 in med school loans alone. Yeah, we had scholarships for undergrad, thankfully. This was our main debt burden. And for people who aren't in medicine, that is a story that they can understand why the need is so great. I think there's still this perception that physicians are extremely wealthy. But I think what gets missed is the amount of money that the educational process takes and how long after medical school, how many years go by while that debt is collecting interest before you can even make enough money to afford to pay. And so that period of time is called residency. That can be anywhere from 3 to 8, 9, sometimes 10 years after you finish medical school.
Wow.
So you might finish medical school owing $300,000. You could finish residency and owe $400,000 just because you didn't make enough money during that time to be able to make payments back. And because this debt burden is so great, that's what keeps people from exploring the possibilities of what can be possible for their careers, what they might actually love and want to dedicate their time and energy and talent to, because they're so concerned about how much money they owe. And if we really want to see representation in the different areas of medicine, we have to be able to eliminate that debt to allow people that freedom to pursue what their interest is and not be driven by their financial situation.
Now, I remember working with you on that story of walking into that room and seeing those three tables. And today, that story just flowed out of your mouth. It sounds to me, and help us all to understand, is that your primary story? Is that a story that you use on a regular basis and you tell it over and over and over again and you get better at it over time?
It is a story that flows, especially for the non-physician audience who isn't as familiar with the process of how this goes. When I'm speaking to physicians about the organization, the story differs a little bit more
Right.
about why the need is so great and what the burden of being underrepresented in medicine means, and where there are barriers along the way that our organization is helping fill. So the story shifts based on the audience, but absolutely it is one that is not only my experience, but also now is the organization's experience as well.
Well, it's nice that you took the story that we worked on together and basically created a foundational piece of it, an architecture that you can then improvise off to the left or to the right or up or down, depending on the audience in the room full of people. But the story, the form, the basic structure of the story, walking into this room and seeing these three tables, which is a story about finance and money and support. And I can see how you talk to a group of potential funders in a fundraising situation, and they hear that, and it's easy for them to say, boy, there wasn't a table for her. She
That's
had
right.
to create the table. Now, with that story, and you know the concept of phrase that pays, because we've talked about this, and when I've come out and worked with your students, which I love to do, I just love to be with those young minds and those young aspirational future doctors to help them find their stories. Do you use phrase that pays? Do you have a phrase that pays? Is it something that has become just part of your process?
That's something that I'm still working on with Elevate Med in terms of the phrase that pays. I think there are components of our mission. We seek to reach an ideal where the workforce reflects the population. I have been able, when I teach in our medical school here at the Mayo Clinic Alex School of Medicine, I have the opportunity to work with first-year medical students. We have a two-part course that is centered around patient-centered care. And when we talk about patient-centered care, we have this cultural humility. So this idea that humble curiosity is what's going to help us connect with our patients and also our colleagues. And the other portion of the course is communication amidst differences. And the phrase that pays that helps string together that work that I've also used with our Elevate Med scholars is that everyone is your teacher. There's always an opportunity to learn from every single person that you encounter, whether you're in a formal educational setting or not. Everyone has something to teach us.
I'm going to share back with you a couple of phrases that pays that you didn't hear, that you just were in the neighborhood of. One of them is cultivate curiosity. You got curiosity. You talk about curiosity. Well, all we need to do is put cultivate in the beginning. We have the two C's. It's alliterative. It's very simple. Cultivate is the action. Cultivate curiosity. So we're looking for, and I really want to help you with this, because in fundraising, you can have a concept like we seek to, what was that phrase?
We seek to an ideal where the physician workforce reflects our population.
To which I go, so I'm sitting out here in your audience. I know I'm supposed to write a check. That's why I'm here. We seek da 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 da. So what do you want me to do?
So,
I mean, you could just simply say, write a check. I mean, but the idea is, how can we make this a phrase that pays, that speaks to their heart and soul, that is metaphorical as well? Because what do they do when they fund Elevate Med?
Yeah. When people invest in our mission, they are becoming part of a movement that prioritizes equality in our country. So where the phrase that pays is in that, I don't know, be part of the movement.
The verb is invest.
Invest.
I mean, you said it. The challenge that you are having and so many people are having is you talk and you talk and you talk and you talk, and 3 or 4 or 5 possibilities for phrase that pays come out. But I, the listener, am confused as to which one of those do you want me to do that is the greatest hook, the most powerful hook? Well, if I am a Black business owner who's done really well and is sitting in your audience, and I'm thinking, I want to help, but I'm not sure what it is that's the trigger. Well, invest in equality. What I'm asking you to do is simplify as you're going, because you are very verbally, effortlessly congruent with what you're saying. Your heart and your soul is in every single sentence, but it needs to land more.
Yeah.
And that's you and everybody else that I talk to.
Right.
Because I say it's called a point, not a paragraph. You might have remembered me saying that. It's like, what's the point? At the end of it, there's a place where you go, so invest in equality, and you stop. Invest in equality. Now you're sitting here in my room today and you're listening to all of this wonderful, wonderful, information about all of these wonderful students. But what they need for you to do is invest in equality, help them have an equal footing in the medical profession, invest in equality. But I'm always the catchy phrase guy, because what I want is the person out there goes, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. Because this is all very aspirational and all worthy. And everybody wants to get, that's why I want to work with you. That's why I love working with you and helping you with that story and helping your students with their stories, because I want them all to succeed. I want the world to be a more colorful place when I go to a doctor. The American medical system has got plenty of white people. It's got now plenty of women. Because when I was 9 days old and I was saved from death by a female pediatrician in 1950, she was the anomaly.
Right.
Female pediatrician in 1950? What? But now female, there's a lot of females, there's a lot of men, there's a lot of Asians now all over the United States, all over the country, rural and city. But the Black population, the brown population in medicine, still way underrepresented. So aspirationally, people want to help. They want to contribute. They want to be part of it. Now, storytelling is obviously one of the ways that you raise funds. Am I correct?
You're absolutely right.
Is that a critical piece of it, that you tell the right stories rather than just facts and figures and data?
It's critically important. We've been working, we were selected as an organization for a pro bono program with a company called Guidehouse, who's helped us put together this one sheet. And the one sheet, in a snapshot glance, gives those facts and figures, shows a graph, shows sort of our reach. So you can use a piece of paper to give that data. But if someone gives you the privilege of their time and attention, you want to use that in the most effective way possible. And that's why having the concise story that's authentic and meaningful is so critically important, so that I can use more of my time on the pieces that really separate out who we are as a young organization and where we're going, compared to the, here are the facts and figures as to why we exist. I can show you that in a piece of paper very easily.
Right. So we don't need to do a data dump when we're presenting.
Right.
When we're presenting, we need to connect hearts and minds.
Right.
And you need to separate yourself from any competition out there, if there's any competition, and I don't know that there is, but you need to differentiate yourself. You are the differentiator, but your facts and your data, that's not going to differentiate you, because that's boring. It's critically important, but it's on a piece of paper. When you have a chance to stand in front of a room full of people, what needs to come through is your humanity, your passion, and story does that.
It's true. And we're the first organization of our kind to really create this holistic support for students that are in medical school. So we're more than a scholarship dispensary, just giving checks. We're developing the next generation of diverse leaders. that's impacting healthcare and creating the possibilities for change and making a more equitable society. And so it's that holistic aspect of what we do that is communicated best through story and not just by facts and figures on a page.
Now, have you had responses? You get up and you give a presentation. You have an opportunity. You've got a ripe room full of people, and you have the opportunity to get up and speak to them. But then you're done. You walk off stage. Now you're in the reception or whatever. What are the kind of comments that people make when they're talking to you that prove to you that that story got through?
Sometimes if there's a physician audience, I get responses that reflect a similar story to mine in terms of being asked to make a decision that they had no clue as to the gravity of early on and feeling forced to do something that they might not have been ready to do. So that often resonates. When I share about being the first Black woman neuro-oncologist in the country and not having the privilege of a mentor who looks like me, who could say, oh, beware of this pitfall or consider this that served me well. It's not to say that I haven't had great mentors who were different genders or different racial or ethnic backgrounds, but certainly there's something about concordance that can help really streamline your career in such a valuable way. So I often get people sharing their stories about a mentor that changed their trajectory or a mentor that had significant influence for them, or those stories that people say, I didn't have the mentorship and I fell off of the path that I desired for myself, or I didn't achieve what I hoped I would because I was lacking these resources. Practicing medicine for those coming from underrepresented backgrounds is fraught with barriers. And so those are the types of stories that Elevate Med ends up provoking. I always hear, I wished Elevate Med existed when I was in medical school.
Which is exactly what you want to stimulate in people. You want to trigger them because your story is triggering their story. And when you trigger their story and they come to you with energy, because I got a feeling when they come to talk to you, it's not just like, oh, this is an interesting thing that you said. I appreciate you. It's not just intellectual glad handing. They have a story to tell and they are passionate and you've triggered them. And now they want to get involved and they want to help and they want to participate because story generates energy, but it also activates participation. You want them to give. You want them to write a check. You want them to become mentors. You want them to whatever, but you want them to participate. And that's not easy because people have got a lot of places where they can give their money or their time or their energy or their heart and soul. And what I'm hearing from you is your story really gets people agitated to the point where they're like, oh man, I wish there was an Elevate Med for me. I need to help you.
And it moves people in different ways. And in some ways I wasn't prepared for. I got invited to give a talk in person, and it was during a time when COVID was not surging. And so this was my first in-person talk that I had given. It was about workforce diversity. And when I left the stage, already I was feeling some relief of having, we get quite accustomed to talking over Zoom. This was my first in person. This group of women surrounded me instantly, tears in their eyes, and shared with me that they could not get into an American medical school. And because of all of the different preparations that are required, and it's important that people realize that now 60% of the students that are admitted to medical school are coming from the top 20th percentile in terms of wealth in this country. So we have a problem in terms of who's getting in. Nevertheless, these women could not get into American medical schools. And so they did what they thought was the next best thing by going to medical school offshore with the goal of coming back here for residency. And unfortunately, what has happened over time is that there are less and less residency slots available. And so priority is given to graduates from American medical schools. So these women were physicians who could not work as physicians in the United States, though they were American, because of this decision that they had made to go to an offshore medical school. And so with tears in their eyes, they told me, and they were all diverse, here we are, here is the workforce, and we can't work because we couldn't get an American residency. How can you help us? To which I was completely unprepared. And so I recognized there's so many barriers when we start thinking about diversity in medicine, what that means. And so I recognize that while the needs are great, one of the things that has helped Elevate Med be so successful in a short amount of time is having a very narrow focus.
What would you say to my listeners? I mean, it's called Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life. What would you conclude to them as a closing statement about what you've experienced about how storytelling resonates and sticks with people long after a presentation, and that's what drives results?
When I think about those speakers that have moved me, or even those quotes that stick with me that I incorporate into my own teaching, it's because they've hit an emotion and they've connected our humanity through the sharing of experience. And I think fundamentally, as humans, that's what we're all looking for, that connection one to another. And once we found that, it's hard to shake. And so I think the power is in very quickly being able to, as you said, Doug, draw that line straight to the heart, to show really how we're all so interwoven. And there's some similarities between us, though our experiences may be different. We can find that sameness through the story. And I think that once we've touched the heart, it resonates. And in what I do with our foundation that promotes or prompts people to give or to get engaged, with what I do every day as I connect with patients in medicine, I share a story that leaves room for hope. And I believe that's critically important when we're talking about our health and healthcare, especially with what I do within neuro-oncology. And so whether it's through promoting imagination or providing some empowerment through validation, the story is critical. And so I used to think that either you had it or you don't. Like you can go and wow folks on stage in a big room, or you don't. It's either on the menu or it's not. What I have since learned is that there is a skill that you teach so beautifully, Doug. There is a skill that can be cultivated in each of us to really curate how we communicate that story to get right to the heart that helps connect all of us. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being with you and resonating with you again. And I continue to look forward to more connection points for us to help each other.
Oh, as do I. I learned something every single time. So thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
Dr. Alex was inspired by Dr. Ben Carson's story to think and dream bigger. His story and his example inspired her to see herself as a doctor, but not just a doctor, as a specialist. How about you? I hope you've been inspired by the stories you've heard in these podcast episodes, my stories and the stories of the people I interview, to realize that your story can be the inspiration for someone else to dream big, to move forward in a direction they may not have believed possible before hearing your story. But the story has to be right. It has to be crafted and delivered in a way that triggers an emotional as well as an intellectual response. I'm proud to be part of the Elevate Med team of coaches and mentors that are helping to make the dream of becoming a doctor, a surgeon or oncologist or radiologist or pediatrician possible for people who have a big dream but need a little help to get there. If you'd like to learn more about Elevate Med and how you can participate or donate, go to www.elevatemed.org. Elevate Med is one word, elevatemed.org. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. As always, if you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your story stick, stories that will make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button. And second, share this podcast with 3 people, or 5 or 10, or your entire email list, or on LinkedIn or Facebook, wherever. And third, leave a review. Please leave a review wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. As always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and your comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning and applying what you're learning. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn. And if you want help with your stories, keynotes, or TED Talks, or if you want to schedule your free 20-minute coaching session, email Deborah at DougStevenson.com. That's Deborah, DeborAh at DougStevenson.com. Deborah at DougStevenson.com. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.